Welcome to the Crazy Wisdom Podcast. My guest today is Dr. David Ziegler. He is an independent consultant in cyber physical utility systems. So welcome to the show.
Thank you, Stuart. Thanks
Yes.
for the invitation.
I think we're going to have a really good one. First of all, what is a cyber physical utility system? Or sorry, well, I guess you're an independent consultant in the intersection between cyber and physical utility systems. So what I should really ask is, what is a physical utility system? Is that a good question?
It's a good question because it is not a very commonly used term on LinkedIn for it, at least. But yeah, the physical side is the power network. So your power wires, your cables, your transformers, everything from the production sides, from the generators, whether it be conventional generators with spinning masses or such like photovoltaic that have no moving parts, batteries, etc. From the generation side, storage side to the consumption side, that is all the physical infrastructure that you need to generate and supply electricity to industry and final consumers.
This is gonna be such a good episode because you probably have a really good insight into a lot of questions I have about how the whole thing works. And this particular system is so important to civilization, about how do we generate electricity and then how do we actually get the electricity to everybody on the planet. And I've been down this thread a lot for the historical context, like what happened in the 1910s and the 1920s with the electrical grids. And if you do have historical knowledge, that's where I would love to begin, is what happened in the 1910s and the 1920s. Is that the right era for the timeline on when electricity became important for civilization?
I think I'm not very versed in the historical side, but I think it was a phase of high electrification rate. So electricity was discovered before, and there were applications. The early batteries, the very early ones that were related also to the discovery of electricity, or in that time. But in that phase that you mentioned, I think that was the big battle between Nikola Tesla and Edison, in that time, where if I remember correct, where the big battle between the alternating current and the direct current took place, and yeah.
So what is alternating current and what is direct current?
So direct current is, let's say you have a charge. So a charge somewhere let's say on a generator or at one point in the network, that is an electric potential, and therefore you have a voltage, and that drives continuously the electricity flow, so to say. This is a bit layman's term, but the deeper you go into the physics, the more complicated it gets. But I will keep it simple. That drives the electrons through a conductor to, let's say, your load, your classic light bulb, for example, that then generates light and heat, doing the work, so to say. In direct current, that happens steadily. There's a voltage, and that steady voltage of, let's say, 200 volts or 50 volts drives the current through to the consumption to do the actual work in the light bulb, in that example.
Interesting. So alternative. Yeah, go AC, alternating current. And can you also tell which one was Tesla and which one was Edison?
Yeah, Tesla was the alternating current. He won the battle, but only after his life. So he was right, but he was more visionary, let's say, and Edison, in my understanding, was more pragmatic business, industrial, Yeah, but there were these infamous battles where they publicly demonstrated how dangerous the current would be that they use. So they killed, I think, even on Times Square, an elephant with
Jeez.
direct current, just to show that this is the wrong technology.
Whoa. And so a
Mm,
little bit of a propaganda too, right? Do you think that they knew that like direct current could actually be the right way to go about it if with the proper safety mechanisms? Did we have proper safety mechanisms at that time?
yeah, that was probably the this was a very early phase, so the AC had very good benefits on protection, on self-clearing faults. So if you touch, you because maybe I should start like this. AC, the direction of the voltage changes
Uh,
based on your frequency, 50 hertz or 60 hertz in the Americas, 50 hertz in Europe. So there is a short moment in time that there's zero voltage. So the direction of the voltage changes. And in that instantaneous moment, it's very easy to clear a fault. That is, if you break open a switch, there will be almost no current that you have to break through. That means you have way less wear and tear, and protection is just easier, and therefore it's safer. Whereas with direct current, it just burns through, and you get these big, these kind of lightning-looking light bows around equipment.
Is this why
And this,
we have the boxes? Like, my home back in California has a box outside of it, which it gets the piped in from the main grid, and then I've got my grid within the house. Can you talk more about those boxes, like why those boxes exist?
you're referring probably to the switchboard.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
I might give too much European
Mhm.
perspective, but from the principles, it's the same. You have a grid connection point, no, to your utility network that is also legally like the the border between your system and the utility system. And then you would have a main fuse, probably. So if there's some fault in the system and there's a very high current going through, this fuse will just burn and protect the rest of the system, no?
Mm.
If you have a problem in your house, then it will protect not only your house, but also the neighbors from the voltage drop. But from the switchboard is kind of your small distribution into the sockets of your home network, no? And then you have different circuits, and each circuit has its own little protection, its own little fuse, or in the more modern ones, breakers
Each
that
each
are
each
switchable.
outlet has a breaker basically. So if too much direct current goes through that particular outlet, it can shut it off and protect the rest of the home system. Is that right?
Mm, in your home system, you have AC because we have the
Oh.
alternating current system. So there is no direct current. There are some experimental homes, and there are some attempts to bring back DC direct current, because in the end nowadays most of your consumers use direct current. So
Oh.
your laptop, your computer, your printer, your screens, your TV, all that uses direct current. Therefore, you have these little converter boxes, no,
Yeah.
to switch in your, yeah. And then there's an idea since many years that why don't we switch out, get rid of all this extra waste of electronics and just provide direct current at the socket. But it would mean changing the whole wiring, the house,
The whole
and
infrastructure.
yeah, it's extremely, that's the problem with the a very common problem in technology, that we are in a system how it is today. Now I'm missing the word. and it has high switching costs, no?
Yeah, and
It's like
but it's
with
but
a
it's
keyboard and a computer.
But it's funny though, because yes, that's true. But then a new technology, and I'll give a specific example, comes and changes everything and allows some people to leapfrog. Well, for example, anybody, if those systems prove to be better, then any person building a house can switch over to that. But that also works at sort of the country level. So, we could take an example of Somalia. Somalia probably doesn't have the grids that we have. And so if Somalia, say, magically tomorrow would have a great government and turns into a utopia and all of a sudden has a lot of money for some reason and is able to invest in whole new infrastructure for people's grids and homes, they could use the latest technology. But the other example I want to give, which is kind of just like totally new, is that we also have something like Starlink, where and this is inside of the telecommunications networks, that Starlink seems like it's an avenue to basically replace our current uh, you know, pipes through oceans in order to bring internet to various places. Like Starlink feels like that's a leapfrog moment where it's maybe in 10 or 15 years when they're signing up for a new phone plan, it's not actually like a phone plan that pings to, little shells. I'm sure all that will continue to exist, but I'm talking about the majority of people might use satellite-based telecommunication networks that just use the internet. They don't even need to use phone lines. What do you think about all that?
Yeah, it's interesting because Starlink, they started with remote locations, right? Where you don't have cable, where you don't have good internet. And for them, I have a neighbor in my parents' house. The neighbor, he uses Starlink, as I understand from just what I see on the roof. Because in that neighborhood we have barely 3 megabyte per second internet connection. You can't do anything with it, really, not nowadays. So you have to go through the mobile tower or directly go through the satellite. I'm not sure if Starlink will replace the global fiber networks, because these are very, very powerful, very fast, and the infrastructure is built, no? And they are very good in linking big data centers with a very high bandwidth. If we're coming to like connected cars and this kind of general connectivity, also in mobility or in mobile phones, there I would agree with you. There might be a time when it's cheaper to directly link to the satellite rather than go between towers and build these mobile phone towers all over the place. But yeah, it's difficult to predict, because one thing in technology always is what is on paper great, what is optimal, what is a great design. But then, yeah, now I remember the name. There's the lock-in effect. No, we have already built infrastructure that works at least to some degree. What is the big improvement from there to a totally new system that would motivate to build it? So with Starlink, okay, they could finance it with these niches that were not covered yet, and by competing, and there it becomes interesting, with the traditional global satellite providers, because you would think that the prices for getting internet on a sailing boat, for example, it's ridiculous. No, it's made basically for big shipping companies, and the bandwidth is also poor. With Starlink, you could get very cheap compared to what they are usually charging the incumbents in that industry. You could get very cheap offshore internet, but you don't,
And
because yeah,
this
why
and
would they destroy the high prices?
yeah,
That's
and I love it. Hopefully, I'm not giving away too many personal details, but I love that you actually know that specifically because you got on a sailboat from Europe down here, right? And had that experience of the Starlink, right? You saw the Starlink on the boat.
We had the Starlink on the boat. Yeah, we sailed from Gran Canaria, passing Cabo Verde, to in the end to Brazil, to Fortaleza. which was a great experience. We had a Starlink, but we didn't use it on the sea. And actually, that was good.
You
I
appreciate it.
enjoyed that
Yeah.
because on this boat there was three more guys in my age that were guests, and the family of the captain with his children. And the children were much more quiet offshore when there was no internet. Once we were in the harbor, they were fighting much more over who gets to use the tablet and whatnot.
And this brings into sort of like philosophical territory, not necessarily the hard tech, but although I have some questions about the power and the grid and nuclear power specifically that we can get to later. But the sort of test we now have, it's almost like a spiritual test, which is that because it's not only the kids you mentioned, right? It's like the kids are just a more intense example of what all of us now struggle with, which is how much time am I being sucked into this highly addictive social internet mediated world, and how much am I actually just being here in with the beautiful trees around me and the beautiful nature
Mm,
and all these different things. And I
yeah.
would say that the kids just represent a much more intense version of what all of us are doing. And so let's actually go down that, because I've got some great ideas for down here in Argentina of going into Patagonia with Starlink, and like one we were talking about before the show of riding horses in the middle of Patagonia. And I want to be connected because if there are work opportunities or things that I need to get done, I want to be able to do both. But then there's the benefit of going out there and not being connected at all, which was normal, but it's not going to be normal for much longer. Like now the whole world is going to be connected to the internet. There's going to be no escape. What do you think about that?
Mhm. Yeah, it's a very good point. Yeah, it's not easy to not only as you say for kids, it's the more visible example. No, they're still learning, they're forming, so we can see these effects more strongly. And I have quite some concerns about developments
Yeah.
with children related to this information flood and this slot machine experiment that we're currently doing. It's sometimes almost depressing to see these developments, but it's also not easy for. I know many people that suffer with that. I also have to exert high control over myself, discipline, to sometimes yeah, focus or not get too much distracted. When you say that there's no escape from this hyper-connected world, I mean, you manage to escape, and that's good. We can learn how to we can learn how to do that regularly, but also most people in society, I think, they're not so reflective
Yeah,
on
yeah,
that.
that's a very good point. Yeah, we're gonna go right into some interesting territory. 100%, I agree with what you just said. There, even though I agree with what you said, I find myself having a lot of trouble focusing when I need to. There's a certain like trick in it as well. As like if I really need to get something done, I'll do it. And most of what I suffer from is actually
Me
just
too.
me thinking that I should be doing something else rather than being distracted. And I don't think I'm alone there.
Mm,
So, but there's other things here as well. Like there is this sense that so what that means is that there's certain parts of the population that have the ability to disconnect even when offered the ability to connect. And there are other parts of the population that are not, that just don't have it in them. There's a and I like I know it's probably a controversial statement, but I think that it's true. And if we're attuned to truth, then we need to deal with that. And I don't know what to do about it. This is where we get into UBI kind of situations. Like people think that we need UBI because that's where we're headed. Is that this brings into the AI picture as well, which is that
mm,
the AI will change what we just discussed to a high degree. And right now, if you want access to work, you need to be on the internet. But if we have AI agents and all of a sudden entrepreneurs are now given this ability to create huge amounts of value with no human beings or very few human beings, and those human beings that they do choose are part of this group of people who do have access to this willpower. I'm not sure if it's willpower, maybe it's just intelligence. Then the world as we know it is radically different, except in these physical systems. Because that's an interesting part, because I've got you here who knows these physical systems. And actually, yeah, let's go right into that. We can respond to what I said about the cultural kind of things that we're headed for, but also there's this physical systems. How much of these physical systems are going to be changed by AI in 1 year? How many of them are going to be changed in 10 years? And like, are we heading into a world where robots will soon take over a lot of those things, or is these physical utility systems, are they pretty much outside of the ability for AI to change?
So that's a very good point. So this actually these physical utility systems, they are also cyber physical systems. That is the combination of the physical infrastructure with the control and automation information systems. Actually, if you go back in time of computing, the cyber physical utility or the power system was the first distributed computing system. It was before informatics professors and or the field of informatics invented distributed computing. It already existed in the automation in the SCADA world.
Wait, can you give an example of that?
Yeah, in distributed computing, you're trying to do something like you want to process information, you want to compute something, and you do it not centrally but distributed, exchanging information, achieving some goal, maybe common computation that makes you more resilient. You can use smaller resources pooled, etc. In power systems, in the SCADA systems, this is called supervisory control and data acquisition. These are the systems that control not only the power grid, but also production lines, converter belts, factories, all this kind of stuff. Before even there was, this idea of distributed computing, just out of necessity, because the communication bandwidth back then was so limited, but you had to react very, very fast. You had to react to the physics. So you had to exchange signals, but you had to make sure that if there's a fault in one location, you isolate that fault immediately, and then you send out a signal, and the whole system can adapt. So technically, you can say actually from out of necessity, this distributed computing was already invented much time ago. We have a bit of a trend now of centralizing more, no? And the SCADA system always had central aspects, because in the end you have a control room and you have a central database, or maybe a few of them, but you were acquiring data and monitoring these processes, the process of electricity supply, the process of running converter belt or a production line, etc. But you have to make at the same time always local decisions. So adjusting the speed of a motor, adjusting the regulator of a voltage in a transformer, etc. These decisions are designed to be made locally and then communicated upstream to the more central unit.
Brilliant. So this gives me a lot of different things. And I went on Perplexity to try to find the name of the supervisory control and data acquisition, the SCADA. So they emerged in the 1960s. I thought you were going back to the 1920s or something like that, to that early world of factories. But this is so actually, let's go into that, the historical, because it sounds like this 1960s is probably really important for your job, because that's probably when everything got formalized. Can you talk about like maybe what was going on in the 1950s that led to the SCADA system?
I would guess, will have to guess, but I would guess the invention of the microchip was around that time, no? A
Yeah.
bit earlier. There's a brilliant
Early
story.
systems used mainframe computers to collect data from remote terminal units installed at substations and power plants. The
Yeah,
RTUs would transmit data back to the central control room, where operators could monitor the status of the grid and issue commands to control devices in the field. Crazy. And I imagine this was probably happening in Europe and in the United States, probably not at many places outside of there, maybe Asia, so a few places, or actually large cities, maybe.
yeah. I mean, the technological drivers were definitely Europe and the US.
Yeah.
I in that relation, there's a great story. I forgot his name. I
I
will
can
look
find
it
it
up
while you're
later.
talking. But
And there's he gave a great talk, and I think you can find this talk online, maybe also. A former innovation manager from ABB. ABB is like Siemens or General Electric, one of the big players in the power market. And he told this story that they were about to buy a startup in California. You know, ABB, because they supply these RTUs and this equipment to get their microprocessors.
yeah.
And in the end, they didn't buy it for some reason. And he's pitching that. He's telling that story. He was so happy that they didn't buy it back then, because this startup later became Intel. Imagine what would have happened if they would have bought it and just use it inside the company, for the existing RTU. It would be a totally different world.
That's really interesting. Yeah, because Intel, yeah, and this, I did a deep dive into the early computing industry, and this is so fascinating because the early computing industry does not just like, it didn't just appear in Silicon Valley, like they came up with this new thing. It was all based on these systems that we've been talking about, and it was all electrical engineering. I know that the
Mhm.
semiconductor that, what is his name? Shockley, William Shockley at AT&T Bell Labs figured out a way to transmit electricity on a chip. And that way that the switching of the transistor allowed for zeros and ones, and those zeros and ones allowed computation to take place within a computer, and then slowly over a long period of time. And as you mentioned, this ABB wanted that probably for their power systems, their SCADAs, in order to do it more effectively. This is just like a layman's take on all these various things. What's your take on all that? Was that an accurate representation?
Yeah, I would say that's quite accurate. It's a bit a step from the Shockley transistor um, to the processors, or the microcontrollers. I think mostly in that time that they were planning to use or using.
Mm.
But in principle, it's correct. Yeah, yeah, I would say so.
And so we've got these SCADAs, we've got these grids, we've got people in large cities who are trying to provide electricity to a lot of people, and you got the power plant, and then you got the consumers, these large cities. It's so complex and so crazy. And this is why I love talking to you, because you've kind of been studying this whole stuff. Nuclear power. Let's talk about nuclear power. What is your take on nuclear power?
Hmm. Um, my take on nuclear power is it's it hurts a bit to see what happened in Germany recently.
Yeah.
Um, I think there's overhyped fear. We have a big problem with fear of nuclear power that is emotionally driven. Based, yeah, in Germany also from this time of the Cold War, no, the fear of the nuclear annihilation
Mm,
that was emotionally mixed in as into power generation.
mm,
There's a lot of irrational fear, and it's complex technology. It has its risks, but the common sense of the people is, I think, exaggerated when it comes to the risk.
yes.
Um, Most definitely, what doesn't change is that it is very costly, no? And that has mostly, I think, to do, well, you have high security requirements. Maybe this could be exaggerated at some points also. And maybe there could be some cost savings in that, careful ones. But I think one of the main drivers for high costs in nuclear power is nuclear power plants have these economies of scale that the bigger you build them, the more, the cheaper you can produce the power. But at the same time, we know that the bigger projects become, the more likely they have multiple times cost and time overrun, no?
Yeah, it's the same thing with the mainframe computers and the software and the craziness that happened in the computer technology is that people started out with that idea of like big projects, and there's the million man hour thing that somebody in the computers was like, wait, it doesn't actually benefit anyone to just put more people on this problem. It actually makes it worse. You can't have more people, larger projects. That doesn't do anything, which brings to mind modular reactors. I've been hearing a bunch about modular reactors because that's basically a different way of looking at the same thing. Do you think that there's any hope in that?
Yeah, I think it becomes now, I mean, if we are serious about decarbonization and fast decarbonization, I think we need also to build new nuclear, especially for locations that are not blessed with cheap sun and wind power. And cheap storage, which is still the big problem in a 100% renewable energy system that is based on very cheap wind and very cheap solar power, but cheap storage, especially seasonal storage, also or long-term storage, which we don't have yet. So that is kind of a technological bet that someone up storage. Batteries are great for balancing. Lithium-ion batteries are becoming ridiculously cheap. I think we're expecting now around $80 per kilowatt hour by 2030. I think we're around 130, 140 kilowatt hours, dollars per kilowatt hour at the moment. I remember in 2012, we developed a business. I was working for a DSO after my bachelor studies, and we were developing a business model and a system to provide electricity cheaply from photovoltaics on households, together with battery storage in the basement, and network them, like thousands or hundred thousands of plants, network them into kind of a swarm, and provide balance the grid using these distributed systems. That was very forward-looking. We received a lot of resistance, but we were right in the end. It was a great learning, but we were calculating with €1,000 per kilowatt hour back then.
And wait, this is for solar. What is this for?
That is for the lithium-ion batteries.
Oh, interesting.
We were,
okay. Yeah.
we already
go for it. Mm-hmm.
like 10x down or so with the prices. And I mean, depending on what happens in the world and, the trade blocks and this geopolitical stuff that can, of course, in this kind of stuff, these kind of topics interfere strongly. But we have already down 10x just for the lithium-ion battery. But lithium-ion batteries are great for short-term storage, to balance the grid, to shift a bit of your consumption during the day, fill in solar during the day, and then when you come home, charge your car, etc.
Yeah,
that's possible, but not for long-term storage. Now I went a bit far from your question, because your question was about small modulars. The promise of small modular reactors is that they bring also these kind of production economies of scale, to make modules that are kind of mass produced and then have production savings that are almost comparable to what happened in the solar industry. Solar became extremely cheap because it's just classic mass manufacturing, and lots of learning over the last 20 years. If you actually look at the small modular reactors, the products that are built or developed by Westinghouse, etc., they are not so small. Like, they're still, multiple 100 megawatts. So I have some doubts about, the cost reduction from scaling. But yeah, to be seen. What happens normally in the nuclear industry, what happened also in the first two are very expensive. That's where everyone involved learns. All the industry involved, the experts, the manufacturers, they build the parts and deliver the parts. And then you stick with that technology, because from there, the next 10, 20 plants will be, a fraction of the cost from that learning curve. So it can happen if you really build a lot. It can happen, but yeah.
So what I'm getting from
it
this
is
that we are living in a world which we have an illusory kind of sense that we're living in one world with sort of all the same conditions based on the internet and everything works. But reality is that it's extremely decentralized still, particularly when it comes to all the constraints for power. And this reminds me of what happened recently with the UAE, which is so fascinating. The fact that they've got a nuclear power plant on the way. They're a little bit more centralized politically than much of the West, so they can essentially just build this thing. And I can't remember whether they already built it and it's coming online now, or they're just made some recent big step. But so you've got them, you've got China, we've got Argentina, which is an interesting because Argentina already has a nuclear power plant. They've already got a nuclear power system, and they've got a new leader who is essentially has some more political will to get things done. So there might be something there, although I might be a little bit too optimistic about Argentina in general because Argentina is starting from such a crazy place. What do you think about that? What do you think about the UAE? Like, which geographic regions are you most hopeful where these new nuclear power things coming out might serve as a bedrock of testing to then hopefully prove to the rest of the world that we got to get back on this thing?
Unfortunately, I'm not very hopeful about Germany being there.
Yeah.
France will have to replace. They are a big nuclear power nation. They have, I think, still 80% of their electricity generation based on nuclear, but they have also very old plants, so they have to be replaced at some point, or by whatever source. And it looks like they're gonna go into nuclear again.
Cool.
Any regions like Canada, for example, where maybe you don't have so much solar output, or where you have very strong winters that you need very reliable baseload power. Everything Nordic, I think, is a good place to look at. UAE, China, I think they have this advantage that autocratic systems have against democracies, which is not an advertisement for going for autocratic systems. But they have this advantage, of course. They can disregard any sentiment in the society. They don't need a debate. They don't need to come to a political consensus, like democracies do. But also I believe that confronted, we will see what happens. If there's a great breakthrough in storage, long-term storage technology. Some bio innovation or some material science innovation that just makes things possible that haven't been possible. These things happen, but we can't plan with them, right? So if that doesn't happen, then there might be a shift again in the sentiment and the realization that if we don't want to entirely deindustrialize, or we don't want to live in an energy scarce future, but actually in an energy abundant future,
Yeah.
then we might want to go and reassess our risk perception to
Yeah,
nuclear.
interesting. That's a really good point, and it's only not related to electrical grids. It's risk. Our assumptions about risk in the West have been eviscerated, not through any sort of external enemy, but through our own abundance. And we want to keep the abundance that we have, but it's a horrible way to keep the abundance you have by holding on to it. The only way to do it is this kind of goes into our whole thing about electricity, not only electricity, also information systems. Because something you had said earlier about the way that you explain the grid of the electrical system and the alternating current and the direct current and these kind of just like dangers of the electrical current because it was overloading the systems, and there's got to be this other system that modulates it all. That also is related to our conversation about information and the internet, and it goes right back again to AI somehow, which is just like it feels like AI is the electrification of knowledge work. I got this from Christian Olstrup. I don't think he is the inventor of this, but he's really made it crystal clear to me about how artificial intelligence is an electrification of knowledge work, something about the compression, the fact that it's trained on the entire internet and can pinpoint different parts of the internet and compress those learnings into a chatbot or whatever. That feels like it's going to electrify knowledge work, similar to this 1910s, 1920s era innovation in terms of the electrical grid, but we're thinking about knowledge and networks and other things like that. Do you have anything to respond to on that random tangent I just went on?
Yeah, I heard that term now for the first time, electrification of knowledge work, and I really like it. Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree with this idea because yeah, in the end, I think of AI systems, there's always this perspective of the kind of AI, godlike general
Mm.
AI thing that dominates and controls every aspect of our life.
Mm.
That is one story, let's say. But yeah, I would like to think more about AI agents or bots that you mentioned, or tools that they can run locally. They don't have to run in a faraway cloud somewhere.
Yeah.
They can
Yeah. Interesting.
work in your, in your appliances even, and can be more or less isolated, whatever the need is for that. For also from security or privacy perspective, and they can do some knowledge work for you, allowing you, not replacing you. Nobody would argue that you will be replaced by saving time on googling something and skipping through hundreds of websites. Nobody would argue that you will be replaced by that, but it would actually make your life better. It would make your life more efficient, and you can do things that are better for you, like sitting outside in the garden and watching your plants grow, or go running, or talk to people personally, or do other work, and free up your space. So that's great efficiency gain that I think will happen, and there will be some people that use it earlier, and some people that use it later. Yeah, but I like the term electrification of knowledge work.
And let's go into your job specifically, how AI has changed it at all. Have you noticed any changes? I mean, and this brings into mind, I think, the way that all of our lives have changed, which is that the fact that it just allows us to do the work, like you were just saying, more efficiently. So I'm sure it's changed it in that way, but I'm trying to get at more And it's so funny because it's so ironic that that 2 years ago we all thought this technology was going to change the world massively in the way that it changed computing. But I really think that this is not a computing revolution, but it's an educational revolution, kind of disguised as a killer robot. Or a creativity like it's helping me to do the work that I normally do in a more flexible way. It's not really changing the work. Like it's not removing the work from it. In coding, it does do that. In coding, it does remove work, although maybe creates more work down the line for when it does bugs in these large code bases. But can you talk more either at that educational level, your personal relationship to the technology, but more I'm trying to get at is in these physical systems and the cyber risk, is it changing anything there?
Hmm. So I think that I see two questions. So the first one, personally, for my work, I use different AI applications. Just when I investigate something, I remember vaguely, how was it? It was this and that. So I know how to formulate the question, and it saves me a lot of time looking up things, no, reading through big old documents or books, etc. If I remember, I have the knowledge, but I just don't have access to it with my brain, sometimes. So I can be more efficient in quickly answering questions on the process of laying out a system or developing an idea, etc. We have a lot of standards. We have a lot of technical system descriptions, huge PDFs of sometimes 1,000 pages that they're very precisely worked out to be very correct and so on. But sometimes you just need certain answers, and you can just save time, a lot of time by processing these documents. You can never 100% rely on it, but on the output with LLM processing, but from a logical point of view, I mean, but you can just save a lot of time by finding the right leads and asking the right questions and speeding that up. So that's how I use it so far. We are working on some project that this kind of grid connection plannings that we're doing in my professional work. So connecting power plants, connecting wind farm, PV farms, data centers to the grid. We are working on solutions to speed up our own processes in this work, so we can be much faster than competitors. We are already faster than competitors because the people I work with, we are very pragmatic, and there's a lot of common experience from different angles of this industry. But yeah, using the AI tools available, of course, we enjoy saving time, saving the tedious work. Yeah.
So
For your second
yeah,
question,
yeah.
Sorry, what was your second question again?
So you kind of answered it a bit, which is the direct applications, not in the way that it's changing your workflow personally, but changing the actual grid. You touched on something that I wanted to go deeper into, and I think it is the second question. It's about the data centers, connecting the data centers to the grid. Is that like in terms of your business, how much does that represent as part of your business? How much does how much of this is data centers being connected to the grid? Because for my listeners who don't know, data centers are like, I think I was doing some research on this, particularly in the context of AI data centers in the US. It's, I think it's at like 3% in terms of electrical grid in the United States, and it's set to be like 6 to 9% or something like that in a few years. So like just a huge electricity to data centers specifically for AI. But is that right? Is that a large part of your job? And then is that the main change? Is it going to be the data centers themselves as the AI connection, or are there efficiency gains like that AI gives you in terms of these cyber physical systems?
I think the number you mentioned for the US is interesting, and it's more or less what we also expect in Europe. I just read a number. The total data center electricity consumption in the EU is expected to be 8.4% by 2030.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah.
So it's more or less in that range, which is quite a lot. If you think this is just computation, it's not cooling your food or transporting or manufacturing, but it's very interesting now that it becomes so big. And I think one of the main drivers is that AI data centers can have up to 10x the electricity consumption compared to conventional data centers. No, all these GPUs firing. No, but yeah, maybe there's some efficiency gains in the future, but the growth is significant. Yeah. What happens in Germany is that there was a high concentration usually of data centers being built around those hubs where you have the international fiber optic links, no? The transatlantic links, the links to the UK, the links to other countries. These global hubs, one of them is Frankfurt, and you have a lot of very, very, very high bandwidth of electricity with very fast links globally. And usually the data centers, the big data centers concentrate around there, especially for cloud computing. But now they can just not build the infrastructure fast enough. And you see now that more and more data centers are built in other big locations that also have good internet connection. Maybe not exactly the same quality, but they have capacity to integrate data centers. And then we're building, for example, in Berlin, or we're working on a grid connection for some data centers in Berlin, which is not the classical hub of connecting the big data centers. So, and that's a bit of difference to in my work that I am in that kind of work. I'm working also more on the cybersecurity part, but the grid connections we do for solar plants and PV plants, we're talking also about big plants, no, like 100 megawatts or 50 megawatts of power. They are still quite there in the countryside. No, they're somewhere in the countryside, distributed, and we find the optimal connection to the transport system. Whereas these data centers, they are usually more centrally built, no, in usually around cities where you already have the big communication hubs.
It's super interesting. So for the last 5 to 10 minutes, I want to go back to the consumption. So I looked up what is the electricity consumption. It said in the US, but then it only said 145 million customers. Is that there's residential, 37% is residential, 35% is commercial, and 28% is industrial. And then I was curious about commercial versus industrial. And then so those are the kind of context for the other numbers, which is 9% of that grid will soon be just data centers, just doing computation, just for AI or whatever. So really interesting stuff. Anything else like for the last 5-10 minutes that we should have covered in terms of these really interesting grid? Anything you've been learning recently about how these things work that our listeners might not know already?
Yeah, I think we could maybe go back to one of the points in discussion earlier, where I find a very important point to make about the distributed computing and SCADA systems. No, and as I mentioned, the history of the SCADA systems was so that communication links were not between, the central hubs and the little RTUs, and they were not stable and fast enough so the system was built to run even if the communication link is cut, no? And this type of, there's two architectures in the smart grid world. So the smart grid being the electricity system that is the cyber-physical power system, so to say. There was a long battle within the IEEE, I remember reading about it many years ago, and about the future system architecture. How should the future smart grid be built? How should the future energy system be built? And it materialized down to two archetypes, let's say, two architectures that were central control. That was one archetype, and the other one was distributed computing. So in reality, we will end up somewhere in the middle, no, because it's life is too complex to give such simple answers. But in power systems, the expectation is that it runs 100% of the time, no, or close to 100% of the time. That you don't even have to think about it. It just comes from the socket. Now it's just there, and it provides you with energy for your services, for your transport, for your light, for your heating, etc. So resilience is at the core. It's like a system that is really resilient to shocks, also to that is at the heart of a power system engineer, a respectable power system engineer, I would say. And therefore, I was fascinated some years ago about this concept of organic computing.
Organic computing?
It's called organic computing, yeah. It was the professor that coined the term, I think, or there was at least one of the first ones. I think he coined the term and wrote the first books about it, was Professor Schmeck from Karlsruhe Institute of Technology. I was thinking I'm doing a master with him, but unfortunately they dropped out of this program. But the idea of organic computing in cyber physical system is that like you design technical systems inspired by biology, by nature. If you think about the human body, the brain doesn't control every signal going between every cell in the body, right? There's a central computer, more or less, but this central computer is also the brain, also connected to your gut, no? And then you have microbiome there, and you have different organs, and they're all specialized, but they all work together, and there's a lot of communication going on between each of the systems, and each organ is made of different cells, and each cell is then specialized for being part of this kind of cell in an organ. And you can go from the big organism, from a human, you can go into the organs, and then from the organs you can go into the cells, and then from the cells you can go into even smaller parts. But it's all kind of built up like kind of systems of systems. So small cells get together to accomplish bigger tasks, and bigger organs go together to solve bigger tasks. And you can spin it up to then family and society and into the world and whatnot. Maybe we find some aliens someday, and we'll have to coordinate with them as well. But the idea, I think, is clear, that we should look into nature, because there is so much complexity that is managed by nature, and that can really inspire us to build better physical systems also that become essential to our own life, to our own. If you would have a big power crisis in a industrial nation, that's something nobody wants to live through. That it can collapse supply chains, food supply. There would be mayhem if that would happen. So we should put a lot of thought into designing a system, not because out of the motivation what pays or what is most efficient now, for the standard use case, but what actually how much a system is resilient to external shocks, which inevitably happen.
Mm.
There's always a crisis that there's always a crisis that we can't anticipate, and there's always a shock that a system like that is so essential to us, or even more and more essential to us, will have to cope with. You know, not maybe at 100% supply, but at least to have some subsistence supply, so the basic functions of society can work.
Yeah, it's so interesting. It's such an interesting mix between the local and the global, and all the levels between the local and the global. And the decentralization, centralization thing, it feels like the last 400 years of the Industrial Revolution has just created all these assumptions about the nature of reality that are so not, and so about the nature of human life that are not givens, but they are now feel like givens, and can all be taken away very quickly. And I experienced this quite drastically in California when, because of a decision in the 1980s and the 1990s from PG&E, the large utility company, the electricity company there, they got some money to bury the power lines that were
Mhm.
just strung across the forest with all sorts of trees that were knocking them down. And this is a very common thing back in the 1980s. They were like, look, they got some money to go fix this problem and put the damn power lines underground. And instead of taking that money and doing that, they decided to pay themselves more money. And then, fast forward 30, 40 years, we had the largest snowstorm in 40 years, and it took out power because a bunch of trees fell
Mhm.
on the power lines. And all of a sudden, I got my first day on the job at a remote company. It was a very stressful remote company, and I was without power for 1 month. And I had to 5 feet of snow. It was impossible to get anywhere. I didn't have 4x4. Luckily, my neighbor did, and he brought a generator over, and I was able to, do all these things to maintain access. But it was quite a traumatic 1 month, but also very
Mhm.
adventurous and very, now a great story to tell. Look, it was very uncomfortable when it happened, but kind of taught me
Mhm.
some really important lessons about, how I should not be assuming or expecting things, particularly in our rapidly changing environment. Our next episode can be on the geopolitical risk to all the things that we've mentioned, and all the shipping lanes, and how the shipping lanes
Mhm.
that are passing the lithium from, soon to be Argentina, now that they're opening up all the lithium mines down here, into the factories in China that are all putting that into batteries, and how tenuous all of this is, but how beautiful it is as well, and how
Mhm.
it's not really, we don't a lot there's not a lot of gratitude for it among the large percentage of the population, but it's all a fucking miracle from my
It
perspective.
is, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we are so used to it. It's I think the last few years have shown that, or have made a lot of people realize that not everything is just given. You know, we were living in the most peaceful time
Yeah.
until recently,
Yeah.
and I hope we can revert back to that path very soon. But it's not given, no.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, but also the answer is not always, just do it yourself. There's a bit,
Yeah. Yeah. That doesn't work either.
that doesn't work either, and you have to be very smart about it. There's a good example about the photovoltaic industry,
Uh-huh.
because the argument was, or the argument still is, if you produce more renewable electricity in your own sphere of influence, let's say, you are less susceptible to shocks, like someone closing your gas supply, or
Mm.
someone not deciding not to ship, or increase the price of oil tenfold or something like that. No, um, with electricity generation from oil and gas that you're dependent from outside, or also from hydrogen. If you import
Mm.
hydrogen from Northern Africa and there's no good political stability, you will be susceptible as well. No, so the more you produce locally, the better. But then the argument is, but all the solar panels come from China. No, they're basically, the solar power, the photovoltaic industry was kind of invented in Germany. The first
Wow.
factories, the production plants that really scaled it up to make a space technology, which photovoltaic was initially, into a mass product that you can buy at a hardware store nowadays and plug it into your balcony socket. But now the production, just from economies of scale and production costs, is all concentrated in China, and some geostrategic considerations of the Chinese government, I guess. But it doesn't make us so susceptible, It doesn't make us as susceptible to the risk of China not delivering solar panels anymore, because what would happen if there would be some cut of supply chain of solar panels? We will not have solar panels, but we don't burn solar panels. Solar panels you install and they run 20 years, no? So, okay, there's a bump in the installation rates, but the solar panels installed, they run the recently installed, they run the next 20, 30 years, no?
Okay, so that's the time frame on a solar panel is about 20 to 30 years. Okay, that's a really good tip. They don't need much maintenance, do they? Do they need much maintenance?
Maintenance for solar panels is more that you have to clean them. If you want optimal output, from time to time you have to wash off the dust, or the big plants in the desert or desert areas, they have this problem that they're in a desert, they likely don't have water. So how do you clean the descent sand of the panels? But otherwise, they just, if there's no destruction through some mechanical input, like extremely unusually strong hail or something like that, then they don't really need maintenance. No, it could be rather the inverter that fails before, then you could exchange an inverter. But the solar panels, you build them, what happens is that the efficiency degrades, right?
Yeah.
So maybe after, that's a bit speculative, but let's say after 30 years, you maybe only have 30% power output.
Yeah.
Maybe less, I don't know, but
got it.
But you can then make a decision, when do you want to replace them, or just let them run, because why not? You already built them, invested, and every kilowatt hour more that you get out is a kilowatt hour is kind of free. You have written it off already. But the point also is, with this dependency on comparable to lithium-ion batteries also, even though the lifetime of them is slightly lower, is that in case of really a big global shock and reorganization and block building and whatnot, this kind of scenario, you could build up a solar panel factory within 2 years, or if you want to do it, if you get the military involved and not so many complicated project managers, and the government really wants to do it, they can build it very fast.
Wow. That gives me an idea to build a solar panel factory in Argentina. What do you think about that idea?
Well, you need not only the panel factory, you need the ingot factory also to melt the sand. That's actually the big that's the big energy consumption, and that's why, yeah.
So we'll get we'll get a modular reactor to convert the sand into this photovoltaic solar panels, and then we'll build the solar panel factory.
Yeah, that sounds like a great deal. I'm not sure if I would invest in that project.
That's funny. I'll do a crypto crowdfunding campaign. It'll happen for sure. I won't run off with the money at all. I swear. I'm just kidding.
That's good. That's good.
Okay,
yeah, that was has a lot of capacity. I wish it was politically or more stable, or would become politically more stable. But resource-wise, it's a great location.
It's just like California. It's the same thing as California. A bunch of fucking resources and a bunch of crazy people who just go crazy with all the abundance and sun everywhere. Can't handle. I feel right at home. Yeah.
It's a funny take. I never heard that.
Okay, thank you so much for coming on the show. How can people find out more about you? Find you on LinkedIn, or what's the best way to find you?
I think on LinkedIn is good. David Ulrich Ziegler. I have a Twitter handle, but I haven't been very active recently. That is called Dinersec, Denersec.
You should
And
definitely
on
get more active on Twitter and start sharing these autist level details of our grid, because I think a lot of people would find it really interesting.
yeah, maybe I should. I should. I have some other wilder thoughts on the energy world, but maybe for another time, or maybe I put it
No,
on.
we can. I would love to do another episode. We got a lot more to cover. So, okay, thank you,
Great.
David.
Thank you, Stuart.